I may have intimated in one of my previous posts that I maybe agree with Habermas's thesis that modernity is an incomplete project. What a crock of shit. I'm sorry, I totally take that back. Fucking Habermas. I'm sick of Habermas and his bullshit. I have no idea what I was thinking. I totally and categorically hereby state that I think that this is a ridiculous thesis. Foucault has this notion of the blackmail of the Enlightenment. According to the Enlightenment, everything is up for question except the Enlightenment itself. You're either with the Enlightenment or you're against it. You question any part of the Enlightenment, that means that you're against the Enlightenment altogether. Okay, so Foucault is talking about, in this quote, he's talking about what he thinks modernity is, and he thinks it's an attitude, it's a philosophical ethos that's essentially a permanent critique of our historical era. So, here's what he says. This ethos implies, first, the refusal of what I like to call the blackmail of the Enlightenment. I think that the Enlightenment, as a set of political, economic, social, institutional, and cultural events on which we still depend in large part, constitutes a privileged domain for analysis. And later he says, you either accept the Enlightenment and remain within the tradition of its rationalism, or else you criticize the Enlightenment and then you try to escape from its principles of rationality. This isn't a question of going back to the Enlightenment and analysing, the ideas of it and choosing which ones are going to go and which ones are going to stay. Because the modern attitude, this philosophical ethos of modernity that he's talking about, is a constant questioning of our current historical epoch. So it's not a question of going back to the Enlightenment and saying, what was good about it, what was bad about it. It's about bringing into question those things in our contemporary society which bill themselves as part of the Enlightenment and therefore put themselves out of reach of criticism. So he's saying the kind of criticism that we have to do, they will be oriented towards the contemporary limits of the necessary. That is, toward what is no longer indispensable for the constitution of ourselves as autonomous subject, okay? So towards what is no longer indispensable for the constitution of ourselves as autonomous subjects. Now let's fucking contrast to Habermas. Habermas wants to keep playing the game. He wants to, I want to say that Habermas is the key proponent of this blackmail of the Enlightenment today, but maybe he's just a victim of that same blackmail. But fuck Habermas. If you're watching this, Jürgen, suck my balls. Seriously. This is a message for Jürgen Habermas. This discussion is taking place in the public sphere between two public intellectuals. Jürgen, fuck you. Habermas's try again answer to the question of what the fuck do we do now? He just wants us to keep banging our heads against a brick wall. He wants to learn absolutely nothing from this experience of modernity. Habermas calls himself the last Marxist, but he's really doing everything in his power to make sure that he is the last Marxist, isn't he? Because he gets it. He can see, he knows what's fucked up in this world, but for some reason, he thinks that all we have to do is keep going. Just keep trying with the same old thing. Habermas buys into the whole system that he pretends to be critical of it sometimes, but he buys into the whole thing. He's got this whole complex structure of the autonomous systems that are out there running by their own logic, and they influence the life world. And the life world is made up of these three domains of culture, with its three autonomous spheres in, true modern style of science, morality, and art. Then you've got the domain of society, and then you've got the domain of personality, which is supposedly how new generations work out how to navigate this complex world. Habermas says that the best role for philosophers in our contemporary world is that of public intellectuals. Okay, so what's a public intellectual? Intellectuals take part in those public debates through which modern societies seek to arrive at an understanding of themselves. Various public spheres from different places and dealing with specific topics overlap or converge at the national level in a cultural and political public sphere made possible and supported by the mass media. The fucking mass media is going to be the vehicle here. National public spheres are simultaneously traversed and complemented by the global flow of communication. This public space forms the sounding board for macrosocial problems that are no longer visible from the perspective of closed, self-referential functional systems. In other words, the diffuse network of a public sphere anchored in civil society is the place where highly complex societies become aware of significant failures and risks and can deal politically with these problems that push them to act on themselves. Mass media, highly complex societies, significant failures push them to act on themselves. Philosophy and democracy not only emerge from the same historical context of origin, they are also structurally dependent on each other. Philosophy has a special interest in the constitutional protection of the freedom of thought and communication, while, conversely, a perennially endangered democratic discourse also depends on the vigilance and intervention of this public guardian of rationality. Tell me, Habermas, where are your public guardians of rationality? Where are they? Made possible and supported by the mass media. Give me a break. Are you kidding? I don't see the mass media aiding and abetting any public intellectuals, any public guardians of rationality. Okay, so here's what it comes down to for me. What's the way forward now? The public intellectual is going to participate in conversation in the public sphere, become aware of significant failures and risks. Their highly complex societies push them to act on themselves. But Foucault, on the other hand, here's how Foucault sums it up. The critical ontology of ourselves must be considered not, certainly, as a theory, a doctrine, nor even as a permanent body of knowledge that is accumulating. It must be conceived as an attitude, an ethos, a philosophical life in which the critique of what we are is at one and the same time the historical analysis of the limits imposed on us and an experiment with the possibility of going beyond them. Habermas wants to just press on, submitting to the blackmail of the Enlightenment and placing his faith in the complex network of autonomous spheres and institutions which make up our society. He wishes to improve them and their interrelations, and he hopes that new autonomous public spheres will emerge. Foucault, on the other hand, doesn't wish to simply supplement the structures of society. He wants to bring the whole system into question. That is to say that any part of the system is up for and available for questioning, for testing. It's not a question of whether modernity is a complete or an incomplete project. Critical ontology of ourselves must be considered not, certainly, as a theory, a doctrine, nor even as a permanent body of knowledge that is accumulating. It's not a question of whether modernity is a complete or an incomplete project. What is important is to discover what we are, who we are as a society, through an historical analysis of those limits that have been imposed upon us, while at the same time experimenting with the possibilities of transcending those limits, going past those limits. And that's why I say, Habermas, fuck you, because you don't want us to go forward, you don't want us to go beyond this shit that's been imposed upon us. You want us to keep going, you want us to keep living in this fucking nightmarish dystopia. You want us to tune up the machine and make sure that it works more smoothly and creates less discontents.